Welcome to the Independent Artist Podcast, sponsored by the National Association of Independent Artists.
Also sponsored by Zapplication. I'm Will Armstrong, and I'm a mixed media artist.
I'm Douglas Sigworth, glassblower. Join our conversations with professional working artists.
Good morning, Douglas. It's lovely to see your bright and smiling face here on the podcast. How are you doing today, sir?
I am actually getting down to the wire here. I am feeling the crunch time. We're down to the last 2 weeks here of getting geared up for the first show in 8 months, and it's a little terrifying.
Yeah, that is scary. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'll be at the same show. I think Bayou is the first one for a lot of us, so good luck with that. That's I know exactly what you mean.
You feel the pain?
I ditched all my work to a gallery, at the beginning of the year, and that kind of screwed me a little bit. I mean, it's great to do that, but, try to keep it balanced and stuff. But that's all well and good if you have a lot of inventory and you can crank it out fast. But I work too slow. Mm-hmm. We'll see where I get. I've got a bunch of pieces started and some new ideas, and some of them are successful and some of them I hate myself for creating.
So it's like season. A regular day for you.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, self-loathing is dripping with it.
For me, it's just getting back into that whole rhythm. We started back into the producing our work again, which it's happy. Like I've said in the past, it's a happy change to be able to kind of get back to the old world that I knew. But there is a little bit of a sense of crossroads here, like wondering what the future holds and wondering like what the next steps are and how it's all going to play out. And it's like a reinvention. I feel like for 10 years, everything was just rinse and repeat. And everything now, there's a lot of aspects, not just my ankle situation, that is causing us to come to a point in our lives where we can reassess how we've done things and do things differently. So getting off to this first show is a little bit of that. Like, what kind of pace do we want to keep? What can we afford to do? How minimal can we get? So anyway, that's what's going on in my head.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Talking to Joachim and seeing, he was talking about cutting corners and some artists that continue to do the same kind of work and cutting corners. I'm like, gosh, I'm sitting here trying to get a little bit more minimalist. I'm like, is that going to be coming off as cutting corners within my work? Because it's always been so busy in the past. And right. I don't know. It's funny. You'll probably see my work and you'll be like, yeah, dude, I don't see any difference. It looks
it's still you.
Looks like your work. That's the same thing. Meanwhile, I'm like, I've gone so minimalist. I've let my characters breathe. And it's like, they're not breathing, dude. There's same amount of garbage.
Isn't that though just the nature of being an artist? I mean, we're constantly in our heads with stuff, wouldn't you say? I'm not saying just you and me, but I think the nature of our artwork, I mean, we attach such meaning to what we do, and we can really live in that and just take it to the extreme.
That's right. Wait till I go to Peru with Trey and Helene. I'm going to come back all loosey-goosey.
Oh, there you go.
I'll see how that goes. That'll be an interesting live from the road. Yeah, but anyway, to get back to what you were saying, I parlayed that into my own neuroses but what you're saying, I mean, are you trying to talk about, are you worried about like the state of the industry, or are you more concerned with how you build your business model? Are you trying to change your model?
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I guess the first part of your question, that is curious to me. Being out of the market for so long, I haven't really sold anything since I went under the knife. So that's been kind of 4 months dormant with sales. Sure. So I do wonder if I'm going to step back into what I experienced last year, or if it's going to not be as predicted. That one I can put on the back burner. The one I'm just trying to figure out is our station in life, not having to pay for children, and if we can pull back as we're aging, and the physical issues and the, do we want to make the same stuff we've been making, or how do we take that next leap? And there's just all of that's going on in my head. And usually that stuff just gets wiped away the minute the first customer walks in and you start that interaction again, and that just kind of wipes away.
Yeah, I do think, we have a tendency, like we said, to kind of get inside of our own heads. And there's got to be a little Rip Van Winkle syndrome. You're coming down from the mountain. You're like, what's all this I hear about rocking and a rolling? And it's, you're wondering, but we're going to get right back on the horse and it's going to be the same thing. And I just got back from Baltimore and it was 5 minutes into the show and it was the same deal. My wife hadn't done a show since September.
Sure.
And she was like, wow, like right off the bat, somebody just irritated the hell out of her, just like, boom. Like, she's like, well, back in it.
Okay. Same old industry.
All right. I used to think that I'd have these unlucky statements that people would come into my booth and say, and like, if somebody says this to me, it's going to be a bad show.
Oh, that's like an omen.
Yeah, it's going to be an omen. And I had to get over myself pretty quickly and kind of adopt that adage that I've mentioned here on the show a bunch. But you're the hottest human in the bar.
It's their intro.
You're getting hit on. They're just trying to make a connection, and they just say dumb stuff. They're fumbling over their words because they're moved by your work. Sometimes they're just being a-holes, but more often than not, they're just trying to come up with an opening line, and typically the opening line is dumb.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, for sure. So, hey, there was a topic on social media recently. Somebody, I think it might have been a newbie, asking a question to the artist community about how to display prices, or how do you price your work? Do you not necessarily what do you mark as your price, but actually how do you show it? How do you display it? And Joachim had a really interesting way of describing in his talk coming up here about how he does it. What are your thoughts on that? About do you actually post prices and how do you show the prices and blah, blah, blah?
Yes, I 100% always post my prices because it does away for me a lot of unnecessary conversations and embarrassment, really, because my work takes a long time and I've got a high price tag on it, and I think very highly of myself in spite of myself learning from the beginning of the show. It takes a long time, so it's got a high price and it's big, and I don't want to scare somebody off or make them feel dumb by not having it on there. I typically I write a little couple of lines too about the piece, non-rhyming poetry, or make it sound like a song lyric. I used to write songs and I used to really enjoy that, and have not done that in a while because I've kind of put that energy into my work. But I'll write a couple of lines and make it almost sound familiar, or take like a couple of lines or a couple of words from a different song and then add it into it, so it kind of throws people off, which is what I do with a lot of my storytelling anyway. So
yeah, it definitely fits into the greater theme. Like we talked about with Joachim, is that he has it as part of his overall narrative. It's not just about this is how much this costs, that he tells the story. And I don't want to give it away.
Installation, right?
Right, exactly. How it fits into that. And I've seen how you do it, and it adds to the piece. It's information to pass along, of course, but it is also, it's an opportunity for the piece to get more information, more meaning, or whatever.
Right. I overthought it for a long time. I have decent enough handwriting, so I just handwrite it. But I had these little letter stamps, and I got the little letter stamps out, and I'd put them, doot, 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 and I'd stamp the thing so it looked like a sloppy typewriter or an old broken typewriter. I've seen one of my art show heroes, Paul Andrews, typed his out on little things and would write something up there. I think that's an interesting approach. I think it's totally fair game to borrow from your friends and neighbors on display and pricing, and I don't think you have to come up with an original idea every single time out of the box for that. You don't need to overthink it.
Yeah.
I don't know, also coming from a jewelry booth.
Yes.
I was helping sell jewels over this past weekend in Baltimore, and I know a lot more than your average bear about jewelry, but I don't know what the prices are. I could guess within like,
this one's expensive.
Yeah, right. It's 18 karat gold. I can recognize that.
Yeah,
and I
right.
can see this, and I can see the size of the gem, and I know. I went to the gem show, so I know what that cost. But
yeah.
I don't know. She had a price sheet, and then several price tags within the display. But if you tag all of your jewelry, that all of a sudden becomes part of the way it looks.
It really impacts the visual look of the cases.
You can't see a ring on your finger. You take it out of the case and you put it on your finger, and it's got a great big old price tag hanging off of it. It looks weird. It doesn't. So some of those are priced, so it gives you a ballpark.
Yeah. I found this interesting. There was, at some point in my past, I was talking to a high dollar artist, and their theory was that if a patron has to ask for the price, ask what the price is, then that means they can't afford it. And I always thought that was a little too
That's
snooty
the classic,
for me.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the classic, but at the same time, I don't want to embarrass people.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't want to like, hey, how much is this piece? I just fell in love with it. And they're like, well, that's $3,500, and if it's $2,000 more than what they were thinking, I don't know. I don't like that exchange. They're like they're hot coals, walking on the hot coals, and we're like, oh, God, we did have a lady, and this was awesome. I repeated this like over and over again. She asked, excuse me, how much is this ring? Well, that is 18 karat gold with a half carat diamond and a set of, so it's $3,800. She ran. Like literally like cartoon ran. Like fist pumping, up and down, ran away. just road runner, right? Just poof, beep, just out of there. And I loved that. I love like, can we make this exchange as quick and as harmless as possible, like it is painless? She just took off running, went to the next booth.
It reminds me of my fine dining days. So what you just described, when someone would ask the price, and the first thing I do before I give the price and give the sticker shock, I would explain, well, what's in it? Like you said, it's 18 karat gold. It's this amount of jewels. And you're kind of setting it up for the value before you kind of break it to them. Right.
Yeah. But then cool. I also don't like, everybody's got their own thing, right? I mean, some people they get asked the price and they say, well, if they're open for a deal and they want to wheel and deal and that's how they do their business, then they're like, well, I'm asking $2,500. Wink, wink. And I don't like doing that, but that works for some people. There's the auction people too. You ever run across those?
No.
This is interesting. And I'm just going to present it without comment. Unlikely. But
get ready.
Yeah, so they've got I've seen this happen, and I wish I could remember the guy's name because I've seen him on the road a bunch, but I think he may be a digital guy. This guy, I've seen him do his booth, and he has little tiny clipboards, and he has literally the buy it now price up at the top of the thing.
Okay.
And then he has your offer and your phone number and email. And then the auction closes at 4:00 on Sunday. And so he goes in, and at the end of the show on Sunday, he'll go through and call, text, email the different people and be like, congratulations, you're the winner.
It's yours.
And, yeah, I accept your price and come by and pick up your piece, or I can do the delivery. So at the end of the show, empty booth.
I've never heard of that approach. That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting. I'd never do it. It's interesting, like a TV show that I don't watch.
Okay. All right. Well, next thing I wanted to ask is one of the things we had talked here coming up is all about artist stubbornness and doing what we want to do and not wavering from that. Sure. And we touch on the topic of if we can make something more sellable. Is being sellable, is that the death of creativity?
No, I mean, I don't think so. We talked with Dolan and Allie Marie Guyman quite a bit about that, about the Venn diagram, of like I work right in the center, and it's like, okay, what am I capable of making? What do I like making? What charges me up about it, and what sells? And then I kind of ping pong right around the center, which is, lucky for me, it's a pretty big center. There are things that I have done. Like take, for example, there's this one client that I have that I'm absolutely in love with. I've met them and their family and their daughters when they were little. And they asked me when their daughter started getting married to do a wedding portrait within the piece on top of all the ephemera of the wedding.
Oh,
I love those people, like, just dearly. And I love their daughters and, their new husbands and the baby's on the way. And that's something that I'm going to do for them. If I advertised that I did that, if I told people that I did that, just throw a rope over the center of my craft hut and lift me up on my neck. I would be done. I would hate myself for doing that. But it's a sweet little thing that I'm going to do, I don't know, 3 times in my career.
Because of who they are and what they mean to you.
Right. And I'm only doing it 3 times, and I've already gotten 2 out of the way. So, and I love it.
Cool.
And that's cool, but it's like, I would never do that at a show. I would never advertise that I do that. I would never, here I am telling our entire community that I do it, but I don't care,
Yeah, no, it's not like you're posting it to, let's say, your website, and then you have collectors banging on your door saying, I saw you did that for this one. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm not asking for absolution for it. I don't have any problem with the fact I do. I guess my point is that I don't focus on that part of my ability that I'm capable of cranking out. And I could do that and sit in my studio. If I posted images of those things, I could do them by the hundreds and probably never do another show. But part of my creativity is you
don't want to be like a factory worker. I mean, then it's just like hollow and empty.
Yeah. And I do repeat, I do have an element of the craft to it. So I do repeat images, but I always try to find something that I'm like, okay, this could be a little bit better. This could be a little bit different. This could be a little bit. So everything's always different and evolving. If you looked at my first body of work versus my current, and you're like, oh, wow, you've really come along. So
we had an interesting customer request once that at first I thought, well, kind of like what you're saying. I don't want to make this a regular thing, but it was almost like one of those challenges where you're like, let's see if we can actually do this. And then it had a good outcome. But they were huge Beatles fans, and they wanted us they had us make a glass onion. And so that was kind of fun. It was kind of like a unique thing. But yeah, we certainly don't want to become glass onion people. You know what I'm saying? But sometimes because of who the collectors are, it can push you into doing something fun and outside the norm.
Yeah, absolutely. I love those kind of clients that push you into a way that you would not necessarily think about your work. There's elements of those wedding portraits that I mentioned that I do. I had to learn how to paint something a little bit differently. Wedding dresses are white and I paint in black, Douglas. How do I do that? So I had
just fill it in red.
Right. Exactly. So it's interesting though that they do push us and they do make us learn. And I've used techniques that I pick up here and there on other things. So
yeah. So you've been talking about this year about adding more space to your work, more space to your booth. And I found it a really interesting conversation we have coming up here, talking about space and realizing how his booth is an installation and how a lot of us are trying to open it up. He's actually making it more intimate. I love that kind of different take on it because it's something I hadn't thought about, making it more intimate, making it something you step into and you're kind of immersed in it. And he's not wanting to hang from every angle of his booth so that people see him on the inside and the outside or whatever. It's kind of like bringing it down, bringing it in.
Directors know who he is and what they're getting, and it does add to a show. Like I said, it does. It kind of elevates the whole business because so few of us, none of us besides him, do a full booth install. Like, is there anybody else that you can think of that is telling a story within, like, as their booth and as an installation? I mean, we've all experimented with different displays, but this one, it's completely unique.
Yeah,
so
definitely. I'd say all the rest of us are out here selling the work that's on a pedestal or on a wall, or that you take and you put in your space. But what he's doing is kind of outside of the box. So we'll just put it that way. It's outside the box.
That's actually not true. I was thinking about Brandon Stiles and Ellie Rusanova. Their booth is more of an installation. It's like a circus tent. It's a sideshow tent kind of display. And that really works for them. And what they're like, he even kind of plays a character in his booth too. So that's really interesting as well.
I wanted to also bring back something you brought up in this talk that we haven't talked about before, and that's this idea of universal thought or creative ideas that are kind of out in the ether, out in the universe.
Yeah.
And there is that impetus to kind of grab it before it gets snatched up by somebody else who might dream it up.
Right.
True. So let's talk about that a little bit.
I don't know. I mean, we talked about that a little bit with him, but I mean, lots of different authors have deeper thinkers, and whether it's Liz Gilbert or Rick Rubin, most recently that I've read about. It's funny, once you start thinking about a certain thing, I find myself noticing those things as well. Like that's definitely happened to my wife with jewelry, whether she's thought about a piece and thought about creating a certain piece, and then somebody comes along and does something, and it's like, well, shoot, now I can't do it. Now I'm not even excited about doing it anymore because somebody else has done it.
Yeah.
I mean, typically they'll do it so differently. But yeah, I do think that a lot of authors have written about that. So what are your experiences with it? What do you think about that?
When I first started with glass blowing, and we were visiting other glass artists' studios and kind of getting our feet wet and kind of learning the ropes. And a good friend from way back when, Joe Becker, who is no longer with us, but he was really impactful to our journey and us starting in glass blowing. And I remember him telling us that about the idea of universal thoughts and universal ideas, and how a lot of us think that we have that one original idea, but stepping outside of our own kind of mind and what we might access, that there might be a greater spiritual realm out there. And kind of like you said, you said, do you ever feel this impetus to jump on something before somebody else dreams it up and does it, and then you feel like you've lost that opportunity to make your own mark on it because now it's like you're copying this other person that's out there?
Yeah, I do. I've come to be a little bit more comfortable. Like, I know I love writing, but I don't write. I'm not a writer. I don't have the time. So I've come up with I've dabbled around with a couple of book ideas, and it's felt really okay with me to just let them go and see those ideas. Another thought, Douglas, and here's my boy Michael Schwegman coming into my brain, who's just like, here's what Michael would say. He's like, well, maybe it just wasn't that original of an idea. Maybe it's not the ether. Maybe it's not religious. Maybe it's the fact that you just didn't have that good of a thought.
Okay. I guess there's the yin and yang for every concept, right?
So comics go through that too. I mean, they're observational comedians will go through that whole thing. And I listen to a lot of comedy or will watch some, and saw two different comedians make jokes about Costco. It's like, well, Costco's ripe for the picking, just go ahead and
that's easy.
You could just. But if you told 20 different comedians to sit down and come up with 10 minutes on Costco, you come up with about a bunch of the same jokes. Okay. That you start thinking about the observations, and you start thinking about what's ridiculous about the place and what could be original about it. How many different people are going to make jokes about 30-gallon vats of mayonnaise and 50-cent hot dog footlongs.
Don't need to shoot the fish in the tank, as they say.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Depends. So interesting. That comes up in our talk with Joachim, and let's just get right into it. Take that as a segue and jump right into the talk. What do you say?
Absolutely. All right. So here we go. This is Joachim Knill, currently in Hannibal, Missouri.
Missouri, the great state of misery.
This episode of the Independent Artist Podcast is brought to you by Zap. the digital application service where artists and art festivals connect.
You know, Doug, I was sitting down and talking with my wife yesterday. She had just come in from her studio and she was complaining. One of the big shows, they decided to do a do-it-yourself, reinvent the wheel application.
Hate that so much.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, it's like typically an application that would take you 2 minutes on Zap. All of a sudden, it's going to take you an hour and a half to reformat all of your images to their specifications. It just made me think about how easy applying with Zap is.
You just click a few buttons, you've got your 1920s all formatted, and you are good to go.
Exactly. So I personally appreciate what Zap is doing, and thanks for not making us reinvent the wheel every single week like we used to have to do.
Before we start, and this is perhaps a little obnoxious, we've done it with a couple of other people, but I have so many different friends, and I think every single one of them has, mutual friends with you, and we all pronounce your name a different way. So let's just get that out of the way so we're not awkward, if we can.
I don't even know if I'm saying it right anymore. I say that's Joachim. You pronounce every vowel, so it's like Joachim.
Joachim. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, you're doing really good.
Because, I'm from Minnesota, and every time somebody will say something, I'll repeat it back with a good old-fashioned Minnesota O in there somewhere. So,
yeah, you got the right accent to get my name correctly.
So I'm going to kick us off a little bit because I think I've met you. You and I both have in common that we've both had at least in our incarnations 2 different bodies of work. And I first met you when you were doing your large-scale, large format Polaroids. That was, God, it must have been like 2003 or 4,
I think
maybe?
It's been like 14 years or something like that. I keep saying 10, but, it's probably more now.
Everything is gets lumped into the 10-year thing, doesn't it? The 10-year mark.
Exactly. At our age, it just makes it easier.
Yeah.
It's 10 years.
So your previous body of work was photography.
Yeah, I had a giant Polaroid camera that I built, and I was building scenes and then photographing them. And actually, the body of work I have now came from out of that because it's basically a big installation for a photograph. But this one, you can go in and interact with it. The other ones, they started out really small scenes, and then I would photograph them. And, I used plants and found objects. I got like a whole museum of stuff I collected to build scenes out of. And then it would be like a whole foreign surreal landscape. They got bigger and bigger, and eventually they were huge. I don't know if you know anything about the Polaroid cameras. Polaroid have made 6 cameras that can shoot full format film from the factory. And they're like 20 by 24 Polaroids. And the school I went to, they had one of the cameras, and I was like, "Oh, these look gorgeous, and they're so sharp, and wow!" But I never used their camera. I was like, "I'm going to build my own camera," and then I built it. And Polaroid didn't actually want to sell me film because it was like their promotional thing to have these special cameras out that nobody else can use. And luckily,
oh wow!
Well, I got lucky because there's a photographer who was leasing one from them, Elsa Dorfman. She's a portrait photographer, or was a portrait photographer in Cambridge.
Sure. Okay.
And they were going to take her camera and open another studio, and then she wouldn't have her camera anymore. And so she heard that I was building one, and she was like, "Oh, could you build me a camera too?" And then I was like, "Well, I don't really want to build cameras, but I'll consider it." And then she talked to people at Polaroid, and then they came and looked at my camera, and I hadn't even finished it. I pulled like a test film. You have to like 2 pieces of film that have a gap in between. It has to be perfect, otherwise you get uneven development. And it was totally uneven and didn't work at all, except it came out. And they were like, "Well, you got some work to do on this, but we will sell you film if you don't build more cameras." And I was like, "Oh, okay, that sounds great."
Oh my God.
Because I don't want to build more cameras.
I thought you were going to go in a different place. Like maybe you bought film from her, but they are basically paying you not.
Yeah, they even gave me a test roll to get it to work.
So what was the reason for building your own? Was it so you could shoot a bigger
scenery? Well, their cameras were
bigger...
huge studio cameras that were really heavy, and you couldn't bring them anywhere. Plus, they were super expensive to rent. I mean, you couldn't just go use their cameras because it was a special situation. So I was like, well, I just make my own. And I made it so it folds up, and it was still like 100 pounds, but I was able to carry it around and bring it place. And I started taking some landscapes. And it was always like, oh, I want to do this landscape with, I want like a stone wall over here and a tree over there. And, I had an idea of what I wanted, but you can't do landscapes like that. You don't find the thing you want out there. You have to recognize the thing you see as being something good. So it's kind of a opposite approach. One is you actually discover things, and the other one is you create things, and I wanted to create things. And so while I was testing the camera, I would just take like a piece of fruit or a flower and light it and photograph it. And I was like, oh, these are gorgeous. And so I just did that, and they got more and more complex. And eventually they were like these giant scenes of things set up with lighting and handheld lights, painting with light. And so that's how that evolved.
It almost sounds like filmmaking, almost in a way.
I actually studied filmmaking.
Is it kind of fall in line with that?
Yeah, because of the lighting. It's a lot of it is like pretty much all of it is lighting. I mean, I feel you can take anything and light it well and turn it into something special that looks great. And so I did, when I went to art school, I did photography and filmmaking mostly. But I really was a painter and drawer before I went to art school. And I took some classes, and I was like, I don't really want to learn something I feel already comfortable with. So I decided to take classes in.
Plus they could squash that out of you.
Yeah, it kind of was that way. There was like this one teacher. He was like from Czechoslovakia, and he was like your stereotypical artist from Eastern Europe. You know, he had like black on. He always had a posse of young women following him around, and he would have a thick accent and sound important and be like, oh, more abstract. Like, I'd be in class and he'd always say like, more abstract. And I'd do like realistic stuff, and he would be like, do you like this? Do you like doing this?
So where was this? Where'd you go to school?
It was the museum school in Boston. It was a great school because you can do whatever you want there. Basically, they have a department in every medium, and you can just, they don't have grading, or you don't have to do anything anybody says. You can just make whatever. And then at the end, they look at what you made and decide if you learned something or if you're evolving. So it's kind of a self-guided school, which is what I really needed. And so I could go and learn everything, like I did ceramics and metalsmithing and welding. I loved welding, and pretty much everything. But I really got into film because in film, you end up showing your film. You got this audience, and it's like, haha, here's my piece. Everybody's looking at it. And I think that's really what drew me into
kind of
it.
that group experience.
Yeah, it's that group experience. But then I don't really collaborate well with people. I like just doing my thing, and I don't want to have to tell people what to do and compromise and all that.
But the experience in a communal setting, enjoying the work, not necessarily collaborating on making the work.
Yeah, not the making.
But it's like there's that aspect of like filmmaking in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I like about art fairs is that you actually have an audience. You're going out, you bring your work out, and you can watch your audience interact with your work and see what happens and see if they hate it or love it or see something else that you didn't see before.
Right. Yeah. So to go back to like meeting you at this kind of, I don't know, you were almost at a crossroads. You were living at the time, you were living out of your van and thinking about Hannibal.
Yeah.
Or you had been staying in your van or at shows. I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, I was living on the road.
As far as
Tell us about that. What was that experience like?
I'd rent a studio for like 2 months a year, and then rent a dark room to make smaller versions of them because I'd make like photographic reproductions. And then I'd be just doing like 30, 40 shows a year and just going from show to show and camping, and which was great. But then eventually it got kind of boring. It's like, oh.
And at that point, you had said, because I remember talking to you, because my business model at the time was to schlock out as much stuff as I could and just move it. And your business model at the time was like, well, here are the 12 pieces that I have, and well, the award money is plenty enough to keep me going. Were you kind of living on award money at the time?
It was like half my income was award money at the time, because the only people like really bought my work were young, and they had no money, so they would only buy small prints of my pieces. Like I hardly ever sold an original Polaroid at the time. But so, I was like, I just want to do what I want to do, and then, get my expenses to where that matches the income from that, which is why I ended up in Hannibal. I was living in Boston at the time, and Boston is really expensive, and basically end up having to make something that you can sell, and you're constantly thinking about how much money you can make so you can just scratch by. And I was like, well, I don't want to think about that.
Right.
I just want to make what I want to make.
It seems like you really are fighting making art into a commodity, basically, right? I mean,
Well, I'm
you
not
want
fighting
your
it.
work
I just
to mean something or
it's-
say something.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I think there's like different approaches to being at art fairs. I mean, there's the business person, there's the creative, and then there's the producer who organizes everything. And you're kind of being all three of those at the same time. And you might enjoy the producing the most, or the selling. Some people enjoy the selling and money making the most, and some people don't enjoy any of those things. Like I didn't really enjoy those parts. I just enjoy the creating and coming up with ideas. So like I said, I was on the creative edge of that. You know, we all balance all of those parts, get juggled around, and it changes too.
I've always admired that within your business model because it is so different, because you keep your expenses low. And I feel like that's something that is within like the Hannibal kind of contingent. There are a lot of artists out there in Hannibal, and it seems like a lot of you guys tend to have a similar lifestyle almost, you know, whether it's like, let's keep the expenses low, let's less of a credit card kind of thing, less of a moving units kind of business model. You're not out there, well, you know, we're all out there to sell our work, but
Yeah.
It seems like if you're in Hannibal, you're making a decision to keep costs low, and you don't have to produce so much in order to stay where you are. Like I'm kind of a slave to that in Santa Fe right now.
Yeah.
Because, you know, talking to Jack Charney, Jack is moving to Hannibal, and he was talking about the rent versus the mortgage.
Mhm.
And it's like, well, you know, for $4,000 a month, think about how much pottery you have to make
Yeah.
versus $200 a month for a mortgage payment on a gigantic church
Right.
that he's renovating. So
Yeah, I mean, I bought my house for
Yeah.
$2,000. So, and I bought it on a credit card.
yeah,
But even like the dedication of, say, you know, living in your van for 4 years and saying, just how kind of like stripped down can I make my life? You know what I mean? How simple can I make it so that what's important to me is at the forefront? I mean, it
Yeah.
sounds like you really, you know, each step along the way, you're evaluating that.
Yeah, or I don't know. I'm just stubborn too. So like I want to do something, I want to do it, and then I just do it.
Mhm.
But I
Yeah.
mean, I wouldn't
Yeah.
say that was like evaluations. Like, oh, if I made something more sellable, I could have I could stay in Boston or whatever. But it's also, I mean, just also Hannibal was also a very central location, and I ended up there are really no good shows on the East Coast, and so I ended up always
Yeah.
having to drive really far. I mean, at first was like, if I can just buy a super cheap house in Hannibal, I could stop somewhere and do things. And if I don't like it here, it won't even matter because it's so cheap. It's like, okay, buy a house for $7,000. Then if I don't like it, I could just sell it again. But basically, it didn't cost me anything. And still, like, we don't have any mortgage, and the taxes are super low. And we don't have to make much money.
yeah. So when you bought in Hannibal, however many years ago that was, kind of take us through a little bit of the history of that as far as like, was there already an art scene there? Were there art show artists living there that kind of attracted you to the area?
There's a
or
potter,
what?
Steve Ayers. He lives here, and he's been kind of pushing to get artists to move here, and he got like a few people from Milwaukee to move here. They don't do shows. They're not here anymore. It kind of rotated. But then a friend of theirs, he moved here, and then he knew some people. There's a Bob and Terry who are doing glass lamps.
Oh, yeah.
And I knew them from shows, and we were friends, and they invited me over a bunch of times, and I stayed at their house between shows a few times. And I really liked the community, and I mean, everybody was partying all the time. It sounded like fun at the time. And so I was like, well, this is...
Are they still, or is that
Social
slowing down
network.
a little bit?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I ended up like, well, okay, I could
Yeah.
just, get something here and see how that works out. And I liked it. So then I came, and then, then Michael Cole, he passed through here while I was in Oklahoma City with a broken down van. He was going to visit me, and I wasn't actually here. And while I was gone, he bought the church and the house that Melissa now lives in. And he now owns a
Oh, okay.
warehouse. then who else? So there was a Matthew Nafsker. He moved here because Janice moved here.
Yeah, Nafsker.
Nice.
Did you meet Janice? So Janice, you're talking your wife now, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So did you meet her at shows, or did she?
Yeah, I
she
kind
move
of
because of you?
owe meeting her to Matthew Cornell because I was on the wait list for Kansas City.
Okay.
They had a spot, and then Rachel, his wife, was next to Janice, but she was supposed to be next to Matthew. And so she asked to be moved to Matthew's spot. And then I got moved to her spot, which was next to Janice. And that's how I first met her.
The serendipity of it.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
It took another couple of years because okay.
So tell us about your relationship with Janice and how you got to know her and you know, how you guys formed a partnership.
Well, I was next to her at that show and I thought she was really cute and funny and great. So, but she was like married. And so I was like, oh, forget it. I can't. And so I kind of avoided her for a year or so. And then, I think it was Dogwood. I think I asked her out for dinner because, you know, we were both sharing down late and I was still liked her a lot, but I didn't.
Yeah.
But, and then after that, she went home and she realized that she needed to get divorced.
Yeah.
Just from having dinner with me. Yeah. But she didn't tell me any of this. I didn't know any of this. We were like texting while we were on the road and she was going to Cherry Creek. And it's the only time her husband came with her. For some reason, he decided that he wanted to come with her, even though they had just broken up. And at Cherry Creek, she asked me like, hey, when you're in Madison, you should go out, and she knows all these restaurants because she used to live there, and you should go out eat dinner in these great places. And I still didn't know what was going on. And then we went to Madison and it's like, oh, and then we really hooked up.
That's when
Yeah. It's like, can you make sure not to bring that guy when you come to Madison?
Yeah.
Like it's kind of a wet blanket. Kind of
that was
ruining my good times.
So when you settled down in Hannibal, was that before you met Janice?
Yeah, I already had a house here and I
all kind of
that was I was already in Hannibal at the time. I was renovating the house we live in now. I had bought another house first and then I bought this house, which is much bigger and more in the spot I liked. But it had like no roof and basically was, you know, it needed a huge amount of work. But since I wasn't doing that great at shows, I had time and no money, but I knew how to fix houses. So I was like, oh, I got time to do this. And so I was fixing up this house and Janice and I were constantly texting and calling. And that winter, she was like, well, maybe I should move to Hannibal. I was like, okay, I'll renovate one room for your studio in this house. And so I renovated this one room. And it was her studio. And the rest of the house was just a war zone. But she had her studio so she could work. And then the funny thing is she was sharing a studio with Matthew Nafsker in Philly. And he had always talked about moving to Hannibal. And she always thought, that's ridiculous.
Who would
he was
do
talking
that?
about divorcing and moving. Yeah, it was actually divorcing and moving to Hannibal. And she was like, that's ridiculous. Why would you move to Hannibal? And then she ended up being the one who divorced and moved to Hannibal.
Wow.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I'd love to jump back a little bit and just talk art a little bit, because you're talking about kind of your photography. And I do want to talk about the fact that you had that photography and you had that kind of narrative, and then how that translates into the next body of work. And you said something interesting about that it's still almost like the same universe or almost like the same body of work, but it's a different perspective. Is that true? Is that
I mean, it's an installation art piece. So it's like, you know, people are like, oh, nice booth. And I'm like, oh, it's not really a booth. This is a whole art piece. And, you know, it's like, it's only 6 by 6 feet because it's supposed to be a shipping crate that somebody just dropped off on the street. And it has like this cultural treasure in it. And nobody knows where it came from, what it went through and why it's here. But people go in and they'll see these stuffed toy animal paintings and they go like, oh, how cute or whatever. But it's just like when you go to like an antique mall and you see like some ancient mask somewhere and you're like, oh, that's so cute. This will be great on our mantelpiece. And maybe it's like a death mask or who knows what it was from. And maybe totally inappropriate to put it over your mantelpiece. You know, artwork gets integrated in our culture from all over the place. And most things we don't even know. Most people won't know where it came from. I mean, patterns. I mean, your shirt has a pattern that comes from somewhere that was like some other culture. And it all just gets mixed in because somebody acquired it and started doing something with it. And in the process, it got lost where it came from. But so the idea was like people go in there and
it had initial meaning.
Yeah, it had initial meaning. It came from another culture. And so I had to come up with a culture. I had to make something up because I didn't want to take a specific culture because I didn't want the piece to be about that culture. And then I realized, well, when I was a kid, I had this whole world of stuffed toy animals, and I had like a book with maps and portraits of the different animals and even building codes of the city, and like all that stuff was in there. I was like, well, I already have the place where this comes from. And it's kind of perfect because I'm objectifying a culture because it's stuffed toy animals. Yet everybody relates to a stuffed toy animal. Everybody has a relation to it. So it's kind of like humans, but it's an objectification of it. And people go in there and they buy these things from an objectified culture. And then some people go in, they just buy something because it's cute. And some people go in and they buy it because they like the whole concept of it. But the people who go in and buy something or come out or just go and look at it and come out, it's like, oh, these are so cute. They're kind of like the actors in the scene because you can be an observer and read what it's about and then see how it's happening, how people are going in there and they're not picking up at all what this is about or where it's from or the concept or anything or the context.
Well, we talked early on when I first met you about how it didn't matter as much to you about selling the big original Polaroids. And it's like, of course, you want to, but at the same time, you don't have to in order to fund it. Whereas you are not necessarily getting the exact same flow of traffic. You have to almost make a commitment in order to see your work. I'm claustrophobic, and I only get to see your work when it's early morning and I can dip in. And as soon as somebody else wants to come in, I'm like, I got to get the hell out of here. It really is a visceral feeling where it's like I'm really enjoying the paintings, but then I've got to be like, okay, here come some people. I hear I got to scamper away. Do you find that with your customers? Like it's got to be a different way of dealing with the clientele.
It is. I think it has a lot of advantages in a way. In terms of customer interaction, depending on the city, some places people will just make a line, like a very orderly line and take turns. In some places they don't. Like you go to Des Moines, there'll be like a neat line of people. There's never more than 2 people who go in at the same time. And then you go to other places and it's just people just squeeze in and don't care at all. So it's kind of interesting to see the dynamic of the place.
Do you ever feel like Des Moines? I feel like Stephen King has like individually talked to the people ahead of time and be like, don't you people embarrass me.
Who is he saying that to?
The Iowa residents, right?
Oh yeah, the Des Moines residents, like I'm bringing you guys some culture, don't you mess it up. Don't embarrass me. And I feel like everybody's kind of on their best behavior, but maybe that's just my booth, but that speaks to it with an orderly fashion that they're going into your space. Do you feel like that, and I guess you wouldn't know maybe, but do you feel like that hurts, or how do you even make a sale? Like, do they come in and be like, do they come back out?
Yeah,
to
they
get
come
you?
back
Are
out.
You in
like
that box?
There's no prices in there because that wouldn't fit this theme. So there's a packing list on the outside, on a shipping crate. And the packing list is just the little pictures of the paintings and the prices and the description.
Like they're
is usually
itemized
like
or whatever.
Like a shipping company would go like, oh, there's a bear here. This is that. It's not like meaningful titles because that's kind of been lost. It's just the shipping company took care of it. They dropped it off and they're trying to get rid of this stuff. And so people will be like, what are the prices? And I usually point to the packing list. Like there's a packing list outside. And surprisingly, people are not annoyed by it. Like, I was like, maybe people will be really annoyed having it's like, oh, why don't you put the prices on our pieces? But instead they go like, oh, sorry, I didn't see that. And a lot of people, and it's kind of fun because people will be in there looking and then they'll lean out to look at the price list. And it seems to be a fun experience for people to actually have to do that. For most people.
Well, it's a unique experience they don't have with any other artist. I mean, and in fact, when I look at your website, your booth is an installation titled The National Treasure, and you actually have a price for the whole dang thing on there, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like you could buy the whole installation.
Yeah. No one's done it yet. Usually people go, oh, can I get one of these boxes in my yard as a bar or something? It's like, no, I don't.
Oh,
I don't build these boxes. I mean, when I built it originally, I was going to have a different installation every few years because I have a whole bunch of ideas. And then, I have one that's been in the works for like 10 years. But since we have kids now, I haven't really had that same amount of time to like evolve my work. So that's kind of slow things down.
They do kind of cut into it a little bit. Do you think that's important? As far as being artists, I don't know that there are many of us. Matthew Nafsker does it to some extent, creates an environment. Eric Lee created a completely different environment. His was more of a living space and trying to convince people, of a feel of once you walk in of how it's going to feel in your modern living space. Do you think that more of us should do that, or do you think that that's an important thing as far as the environment that we create?
Not necessarily. I mean, I didn't do it to make a better display. I did it because of the whole concept of it. And it has some big advantages that I didn't foresee, like setting it up is so easy. Like the first time I set it up, I was like, wow, this really beats putting up walls and a tent, and your walls could be your tent. And then the other thing is it's like storm resistant. It's not going to blow over. I never have to worry about wind or those sorts of things. So that's been a big advantage. And then also I have space around it because it's smaller.
Yeah,
it's kind of worked out.
But you never exhibit on the outside. It's only
if I put pieces on the outside, it becomes a display. Then suddenly it's not a shipping crate anymore. So that would break the concept.
The theme.
Yeah. I mean, I used to, in my old booth, I would play guitar in the back all the time. And it's like, I stopped doing that because that doesn't fit the theme. It's like if I was sitting next to it with a guitar, it's like, well, what's going on here? This is not a shipping company. That's some guy with a carnival box or something.
All right.
Which is anyway the thing you have to like watch out for when you bring things to a show is there's things you didn't think people are going to see. Like they're going to see something that you didn't predict. Like when I brought this out, Bill's like, "Oh, is this the TARDIS from Doctor Who?" It's like at first I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about because I never watched the show. It's like, right.
Right.
Or a lot of people go like, "Oh, is this a porta potty?" It's like, "Oh, I didn't really think of that either."
Oh my God. Yeah, please no. Please no.
That is an interesting reactions of people that you wouldn't expect that people might have.
Yeah, so you kind of learn.
If you've got Plaza, it's is this a good place for me to vomit?
Yeah.
Try to find my little spot.
Yeah, it is kind of like that.
So does it attract a different kind of a collector than, let's say, the cash and carry kind of person who would
it's
walk
all over
into
the place. Some people go like, "Oh, I know what my customers look like, and I can tell you this person's going to buy something, and this one definitely won't." I've had the biggest mix of people. Like I could never tell you who would buy something or not. It's so all over the place, which is kind of cool because I guess it doesn't fit into a concept of a typical, this is landscapes for your country house, or this is, it's not like a typical thing for a certain type of person. It's really kind of outside of the box in that sense. Plus it is traditional looking. The paintings look like old traditional paintings. So it's still interesting for people who like traditional things while also being totally not that. So it kind of can go in any direction for who buys something.
Yeah. Did you have any, this just kind of occurred to me, but I know that Matt Hemminghouse is also from kind of that area. He's close enough for dinner parties anyway, but were you one of the folks that kind of convinced him to start doing art shows? Was that
Janice
any of your influence at all?
Yeah, Janice ran into him at there was a little art supply store for a while, and she ran into him there and talked to him, and then we started hanging out, and we kept telling him, he was doing paintings at the time, and so I kept telling him, you should try shows, and then eventually he did some t-shirt designs, and he was doing that and his paintings, and so we totally got him into doing shows.
Yeah, I love that, and because I can kind of see the environments that he creates, I could see a little of your influence. Maybe
he was
on that.
He was using our printer for his prints for a long time until he bought his first printer. I gave him big roll of lighting gels for color lighting, so I kind of helped supply him. And it's like, oh, you actually are doing what I was doing, in some sense. I mean, it's different themes.
You're like you're a drug dealer. Yeah. You're keeping him
I'll
addicted.
Get you started with some gels.
That's right. You give him those gels for free when he comes back.
So, what would you say is the inspiration behind the subject of your paintings? I mean, you work with images of stuffed animals, and it almost feels a little post-apocalyptic, like back when the stuffed animals roamed the earth or something like that. I mean, can you tell me about that, about what inspires you to create those,
I wanted
those images?
I wanted them to look like old historic paintings. So it's from a lost old culture. And when you look at what European culture, what the paintings are, it's always either royalty or romanticized peasant scenes or battles, generals. So I try to have a mix of all the types of things you'd find in old, that historians look at for figuring out a culture. And then I don't actually think of the story. I like to create a visual that contains a lot of things, but I couldn't actually tell you what has happened, except it all makes sense. All these things connect the right way. There's obviously a battle, there's people fleeing, but I don't know why there's a battle, all that. It's kind of like when you find an old painting and there's a battle scene, and you don't know where it came from, you kind of have to guess, okay, obviously these people must be attacking those, or maybe this is not even a battle. Maybe it's just a fire and it was a disaster that they're fleeing from. So I kind of like to keep it vague yet full of information, because I kind of want people to be able to go into a painting or into my scenes, like the whole installations that way too, that there is kind of as little limit as possible to how far you can go into it, but yet have it vague enough that you can interpret it in many different ways. I mean, it's even in the expressions on the creatures. It's always like, okay, this is too smiley. Now it looks like it's just smiling. Now it just looks like it's just angry. I have to tweak the mouth a little bit. So it's like, I think it's smiling. It's like, oh, but it's also kind of sad. Also, it looks kind of angry. So it's like this kind of a full all around creature. And then people, they notice that and they go oh, because then usually if you have a painting of a stuffed toy animal, it would be just cute. And it's like, oh, look at the cute stuffed toy animal. But then these have a whole feeling behind it that is clear but vague at the same time.
Right. You had done a painting that speaks to that. It really spoke to me, but it was I think you called it The Lovers, but it was two bears and they're sitting around a kitchen table, and there was an element of weight and the couple that fights all the time. To me, it looks like, and maybe that's because I was going through a divorce at the time. But it's an open-ended story, and you can bring to it whatever you want to. But the couple that's sitting around the table, that's just, to me, they just kind of been through it. Should they part ways? Should they not? But it's still called The Lovers.
It is. I mean, I put into it to make it. I want it to be heavy, but not clearly heavy in which way. I mean, it could be a very deep love that they have, and they're just in awe of each other. But you can be so much in love you're tired of it too. Kind of worn out in love. But
right.
So I really wanted it, to have a strong emotion, but not just yelling it out in one direction or another. And that's your experience of it is kind of exactly what I aim for. And in a different mood, you probably would have read it differently. You would have been like, wow, they've been together for a long time and their bond's still strong, and they live in this hut in the country somewhere, but they have no electricity. Who knows, Totally.
Right. Open-ended enough that the viewer can bring their own experience to it and put their own meaning onto it. Yeah, for sure.
Well, that's kind of what Ben Fry was saying. Sometimes what sometimes what our artwork is about is maybe none of our business.
Yeah.
People bring their own stories. And I'm remembering, too, after I'd seen that painting, I had been to dinner with another couple of artists, and it was just one of those couples that, and I'm not going to name them here, but they since have broken up, but it's one of those couples that you wish would break up. You're like, oh my God, the burden of this. And I saw that painting, and I remember asking you about it, and you're like, no, it's not about them, but maybe it is to you. And it kind of seemed like a portrait, but I love that kind of storytelling. There's almost like a Tolkien element to it. There's a Meow Wolf element to it too, if you're familiar with any of those inspirations.
I haven't been to one yet. We do want to go, but
yeah, I think you'd really enjoy it. I think they'd I don't know, your aesthetic would fit right into a room in Meow Wolf. I think you'd really So come to Santa Fe.
Yeah.
Go dive into it. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, I think our kids are old enough to enjoy it.
That's not for everyone. That's just for him. I'm not
That's a
inviting the
personal
listeners. He can't come.
You all should come.
That's right. Everybody come. No, just him.
So you've talked about it in your work and in your life that you like to keep things, kind of simple so you can live the life that you want. You don't want to have high overhead regarding studio expenses, living expenses. Have you found since starting a family that kind of challenges that a bit, or are you able to have a family and keep things more on the simple?
Well, the biggest challenge is time. When you have a family, it's just like it's a lot of time, especially living at home, working at home. You can't really. I know people have 9-to-5 jobs, and they just leave their kids and go to work, and one of them stays at home and they still get the same amount of work time in, but it's not really how we work. And I built a house around being like, I don't really like to go to work. I guess I'm kind of lazy but stubborn. So so I had to build it. Like the old house, I had a studio that was upstairs and I'd be downstairs, and I'd always be like, oh, I really want to try this thing with painting or something. And it's like, maybe I'll do it later because it's like upstairs and I'd have to get a bucket of water and, get it all set up. And then I'll be upstairs and I don't really want to go there right now. And so when I built this house, I was like, it's got to be open. I took a floor out and all the rooms face a main center. And if I'm in my studio, it's like I'm still connected to the living space and I don't feel like I had to go leave and work. But now that we have kids, it's kind of coming back to me.
They always need something, right? There's always something
always
to pull you away from it.
Yeah, then they'll have fights or there's some struggle, and because we are home all the time, they need us more too. They're not used to just being on their own. I mean, it's all gotten easier since they're older now. They play together, but then every time there's like some struggle, it's like I'm pulled. I feel like I gotta go do something about it, even though they might be able to figure it out themselves. But it's like, oh, I gotta go. Even if I don't, like Janice might be there doing a lot of it, but I'll still hear it and I'll be like, definitely have less time. Like before, we'd both be in the studio working all the time. And now it's like at the most one of us can be in the studio. And sometimes we can both do things.
And does Janice keep her art practice up too? Are you both two artists practicing your work?
Well, what happened was when we had kids, she was burnt out from doing jewelry, and she really wanted to get out of it anyway. And then we were kind of naive things like, oh, wait, with kids, they'll just be, the baby will be in a playpen. We can still do things, which we didn't have a baby like that. We had a baby that had to be on you all the time and wouldn't fall asleep unless, or stay asleep while you're carrying him. And so because she was done doing jewelry, she hadn't actually started anything new, and that didn't happen until now. She's playing around with ceramics and finding her voice in that.
Is that just with a line on showing it, or is she just enjoying creating and trying to figure out where her, like you said, her voice
right now
is?
I think it's more the creating and finding out what to do. There's not really a plan.
Yeah.
Oh, in terms of the question was the financial thing or simple living, having kids.
So like for me, I feel like when Renee and I went into this business as being two artists, and we kind of had it laid out that everything was going to be simple and low cost. But as our kids grew, it's hard to fight the American way of things. The kids want iPhones, they want technology, they want games, they want, and how to keep things on a level where it doesn't get out from under you,
Yeah. Well, so far I don't think it has gotten expensive. I mean, they're like 5 and 8 now, so they're not in the high expense period yet.
Right.
But also, luckily, coincided with my painting selling well, so we haven't really had to deal with having any financial restraints, especially since we have no other expenses. I mean, we have no rent or mortgage. The taxes on the house are like $400 a year. It's really just food, car insurance. Health
That's
insurance,
the dream,
luckily,
right there.
now is pretty much free because of Obamacare.
But it harkens back to my what I think about with my conversation with Duke Clausen, and it's really about every spending thing becomes intentional. so that you can be independent and you can make choices that aren't based on being like overextended. And it sounds like you have crafted your life that way where you keep the overhead down. And perhaps we've talked about this aspect a lot, but it kind of seems like an overarching theme for you. It's really being intentional about how you live your life and about the choices that you make.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I realized that living in Boston, there's all these fun things to do. And I realized I never do them there because I'm too busy. You spend all your time trying to make a living so you can live there, and then you have no time to actually go do any of the great things or afford going out to the restaurants and having been doing shows. I was like, well, I go to cities all the time, and I do more in the cities that I go to a show at than I ever do when I'm home in the city. And also personally, I'm not that social of a person when I'm home. I really like to just be at home and make artwork. So like, I don't need to live in a city and spend all this money when I could just have the same exact thing in a place that's free, basically.
Do you carve time out then? When you go to cities, do you carve time out to do things and take advantage of the areas that you're in?
Not as much as we used to. I mean, when I first did shows, I would always stay an extra day and do lots of things and do sightseeing on the way to a show.
I mean,
but I kind of got bored with it. And then, of course, now with kids, it's like, wow, that's just so much involvement, getting them ready to go anywhere and then keeping their attention to want to stay at this museum or, like going out to eat is just a struggle sometimes. I mean, this is all getting better now.
Yeah. Do you travel with the whole family then? Or do you just go out and back?
We used to at the very beginning, and then it just got too difficult.
Yeah.
And now we do about 3 shows a year that we go together. We always go to Houston. Janice has family in San Antonio, so afterwards we go to San Antonio to visit there. Houston has amazing restaurants. I mean, it's just like you can have any kind of food that's like the best version of it. And so, and then the museums are incredible. And now with the kids, like they love the Natural History Museum, that dinosaur collection there, and the Children's Museum. They're all just fun and great things to do. And then the show has shorter hours, so you can actually enjoy being there. It's like some shows, you just at the show all day. There's like no time. Basically, Janice would just be babysitting the kids all day and having to do things with her while I'm sitting at the show all day, and then the day's over. Like, not really have anything else.
I remember distinctly when we were young parents and traveling to art shows, and really one of us was a babysitter in a hotel, and that's not fun for the kids. No. And it's not fun for the parent who's basically trying to keep them from bouncing off the walls. So, there is that aspect of being artists and making a living and the logistical stuff that just has its own added complexities when you're a family.
Yeah. But then Janice likes to not just stay in a hotel. She likes to go see lots of things. So then it gets extremely stressful when you have 2 kids and trying to go lots of places. She's always very positive about the possibilities, and then it turns out.
But the reality sets in.
Yeah, the reality gets pretty stressful.
I feel like that's like 10 a.m. me has all these plans for 10 p.m. me.
Yeah.
And 10 a.m. me is like very ambitious, and at 10 p.m. me is just like a stick in the mud. Doesn't want to do anything. Like, I'm not going out and doing that. I don't care that much about that band.
That's great.
I remember going to see, I think that was at Bayou, actually. A big group of us went down and went to the Continental Club back when our good friend Mark Orr was still with us. Took him out to see Southern Culture on the skids and had a big time. But man, that was probably 10 or 12 years ago.
I think things have slowed down with our generation.
Yeah, for sure.
And I don't know, there's different factors here too. Like I remember first doing shows, I'd be like this group that kept getting bigger that would go out every night to some restaurant, and it eventually became like a wedding reception every place we went. There's like 40 people in a restaurant all ordering different things.
I was a part of that one time. Somebody had organized one of those things, and we had said, no, we're not going to go, but 3 of us still went, and we got our own separate table, and we still got to visit with everybody, but we got our own separate server. And you guys had this huge banquet. I think it was in Coconut Grove. I think it was this gigantic impromptu banquet that they had to take care of, and we just had a little foretop, and everybody that we wanted to visit with still came over and visited with us. And I think other people were like, man, we should have done it like
Yeah.
that because we had the best service. We could get a drink whenever we wanted. We got the food. And our food came out, I think, of like an hour and a half before we did.
And then when the bill comes, it's like, it's easier. You don't have this one bill for the whole table, which can take all night to pay. You know, everyone's like, did you have the whatever or whatever? Yeah, it's like
that stresses me out. I love the people, but it stresses me out to the point where I can't actually even do it anymore.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I have to ask. I'm like, well, wait a minute. How many people are coming? And they're like, well, it's going to be this. I'm like, I gotta say no. I love those people, but I'm going to have to say no.
Like, I'm out.
I kind of wondered like how it ended. I think partially I noticed like at the time I was making hardly any money, and they'd always go to really good restaurants, which I love, but I had no money for it really. But I'd be like, I'll just get a salad, and then I'd go in and I'd get like the most expensive steak, which just couldn't help myself. But still, it's like everybody else was having like $10,000 shows and way more than I made, and they could do whatever they wanted, and I'm like, oh, I just want to hang out. And then there was the downturn in 2000, I guess, was it, or whatever, one of the big financial downturns, and suddenly everybody's income went way down, and after the show, I'd be like, oh, anybody going out? It's like, no, we're too tired. I think we're just going to the hotel.
We're gonna order an appetizer at the hotel bar.
Right.
I always,
you're hanging out with the big boys all of a sudden, and they're making all of this money, and they're like, well, let's just and you get yourself a tiny little thing.
Yeah.
And, you're trying to cut corners, and they're like, well, we'll just split it 5 ways. They're like, but I didn't have $14 cocktails.
But I mean, that does remind me, Will, of our last talk when you asked me about going to shows and going to really good restaurants and stuff. Renee and I always, for years, we kept it so simple with groceries. We were that person who we'd buy a bag of groceries and eat out of our hotel room because we just wanted to keep everything so bare bones. Mm-hmm. And so I mean, that is definitely a way of life for a lot of artists out there. We don't want to throw away all of the profits.
Yeah.
For me, though, it's always been like, and this kind of carries on our conversation last time, Douglas. To me, it's like there are these carrots that I have along the way. And I'm like, well, Houston, I'm going to bust my butt. And like, I know there's a barbecue place that I know about that I've already been like, I texted Cliff about. I'm like, you got to try this. So we're going to go hit some barbecue. So I like, that's a carrot for me. I get to go see my buddy and have some incredible barbecue. And then like the food of the city is like Houston, like you said, is amazing and oddly incredible sushi.
Yeah.
A couple of really great spots.
Like
there.
Uchi. Have you been to Uchi?
Yes.
Best.
I think I might have been with you.
Oh, really? It's possible. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, we stopped going because it got too busy and
been
loud, and with the kids, it wasn't possible anymore. But
for sure. But that's always been one of our big carrots along the way, is just to kind of see, okay, well, we can go to this spot or
the out of the way, then maybe the not so fancy, but the good thing.
Well, this is one of the exciting shows about doing art shows is you get to go to all these. Going to restaurants is one of the highlights of the traveling. On the other hand, for me, staying at a hotel is a big waste of money because all I'm just going to do is sleep. But then in my van, I have a comfortable bed that's actually I sleep better in it than in a hotel. So I'm almost like, I'm not going to spend $200 a night or $100 a night just for like a European prison cell to sleep in when I could just stay in my van. And then also you don't have to commute. Usually you can park right at the show somewhere. And in the morning, I just get up. It's like 10 minutes before the show opens and just stroll over to my booth. And
I talked to another artist who said the same thing. They're like, they sleep in their van better than they sleep at home or in a hotel. And it's just like, there's something about that just puts them out and lets them feel at ease.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there's a whole culture of van campers, too.
Yeah.
You can kind of find your circle of folks. I know that there, like the Coconut Grove van camping is a big deal. The Winter Park has a really nice parking lot and kind of a really fun parking lot party, too. Whether you're staying in a hotel or not, the parking lot party is always a lot of fun there. So, so it's just a whole nother culture.
Yeah, just now with kids, when we go with the kids, we do get a Airbnb and have a nice
Yeah,
house.
that's a whole
That's-
different. Yeah.
Yeah.
But when you're on your own, you do kind of like the nomad land kind of thing. You even now you still that you'll camp out of the van.
Yeah, there's a few shows where it's very unpleasant. Like Fort Worth doesn't really have a parking lot.
Yeah.
And last year might be the last year I stayed in my van. I stayed in the parking lot that was kind of for the show. It wasn't free. But at night, some drunk guy came and started throwing rocks at my car. And it's like, this is no good. And that I had to move my van over to a parking lot or to the street across from some cop cars. Like, okay, I can probably feel safe over here. And it's just not a pleasant show to do that. Plus, they have a really cool hotel that I was like, oh, this is a hotel I would love to stay at. And then I did well last year. So I'm like, I'm going to treat myself to a hotel room next year. So I'm actually going to have a hotel room, which is special.
Very, very fancy.
Yeah, very fancy. And it's a fun hotel because it's all modern and it's not, like the standard hotel fare, which I really don't like.
Yeah. Okay, so now I want to bring it kind of back to your art and talk about you. Like, how would you define yourself, or how would you define you as an artist and what that means?
Yeah, I guess I'm more of a conceptual artist, and it's more the ideas. Like I don't like some people go in the studio and they'll just like splatter around stuff and see what happens and then come up with something on the spot. Well, I'm usually think of an idea and I have it like visualized and fleshed out in my head. By the time I do it, I'm basically just some slave following my orders. It's not always the most pleasant because I'm like, I got to make this thing that I thought up and it's got to be precisely the way I wanted it.
And do like more details evolve as you're going down that road? You know what I'm saying?
I mean, a lot of the bigger picture, I don't start like an installation until years after I first thought of it. Like I'll have a bunch of ideas that just float around, and the ones that stick after 5 years and have gotten more fleshed out. Once I really know what it is, I'll start making it. But of course, while I make it, I'll discover details that I didn't think of that need to be fleshed out more precisely to make it fit right.
So have you ever had any of your ideas as far as like come up with a new concept that then you see something else like this happens? I've read a couple of different writers, whether it's the new Rick Rubin book or like even Elizabeth Gilbert talking about ideas that just kind of belong out there, that somebody else might grab a hold of. Have you ever found yourself kind of coming up with a concept that you kind of see slipping away because somebody else does it?
Not exactly. There was that one painting. I had like some painting ideas that like a whole different thing. And there are some that somebody at a show ended up doing something that was kind of like it. And it's like, that's kind of my idea. And I might have told them about it.
Right.
Sometimes I talk about my ideas.
And they ran with it.
It wasn't exactly my idea, but it was, it involved like cell phone towers and radio waves around it, which is not a new thing in itself, but the whole, all of it together was not the same thing as what he did. But anyway, I haven't really seen that happen. Like the thing I'm working on now, I have like every year, it's been kind of ready for 8 years, except it's missing a few details and I haven't had time to work them out. But like every year, it's like, well, I can just bring that out next year maybe, or the year after. And I do feel like it's not time constrained. Like, once I bring it out, it won't be like, oh, you should have brought that out like 3 years ago. And this was like a really popular thing. Or before this other person did it. Yeah.
Another question that I had that I really wanted to ask you too is about your paintings, your specific individual paintings within your big idea of the installation. Do you repeat compositions, or do you ever repeat things? Because it seems to me like you don't.
No, not really. I mean, I have little portraits, and I have many portraits I did of just a teddy bear, but they're always different. And definitely on the more complex ones. Yeah. I've had one time I did like a surgery scene, and there was like a bunny having surgery and being cut open. And then somebody bought it, and then somebody else who was like a med student was like, I wanted that painting. Can you do another one? And it's like, I don't really ever want to do that, because then it's just I'm just in a factory making the same thing over and over. So, but then I did do a different version of it. It wasn't exactly the same. And then he had no money at that time, and then somebody else bought it, and he still wanted it. I was like, I'm not doing a third one of that. I'm not doing another one. But yeah, I mean, the fun part is inventing something. So if I'm just copying, then I'm just having a job. I'm on a job got to do more of these surgery scenes and do another 10 surgery scene by Friday. So yeah, I avoid doing that.
That's good. And I think part of that is your choice of where you live too.
Yeah.
You don't have to become a slave to it. Like, Mark Winter was talking about that and becoming a slave to an idea. As soon as you as an artist, especially in this business, as soon as you find something that hits, I feel like you do have to kind of do it over and over again if you want to maintain that. Like,
or you could just
monetary values.
Well, I think you could also trust that you're going to come up with other ideas that also are hits. But it is very tempting. Like, you do something, and I see it so many times, somebody had like something they did, and then they sold a bunch of those, and they kept making more, and then they started simplifying them. They got rid of all the stuff that is not why it's selling and making it easier to make and quicker, and suddenly they had a booth full of these paintings that these are not as good as the original one was, because they got rid of a lot of the detail. But it still has like the three elements that make it sellable, but it's not now it's suddenly like a product. But, that's a choice you make. What do you rather do? Make money, make art, or sometimes both works out. But sometimes I'm a little jealous. Like, there are times I'm like, I wish every piece I make isn't like a new challenge, and because every time I do a new one, it's like, okay, what are the highlights, shadows? What's this background? And it's like, it's kind of mentally challenging to always reinvent a whole world in a way. And it's like, sometimes I wish I had something repetitive I could just do. Like, I just want to make something, but I don't want to have to think about it. Like, if I could just go and knock out something that happens automatically, I can just kind of do it like a meditation instead of a mental challenge. That will be more relaxing. And I do sometimes miss that. The reason I haven't done it is partially because I hate working. But then I had an idea, I had some concept idea where it is about mass production, like a whole concept, an installation that's about mass production. And for that installation, I would have to build a mass produced thing. So I would get to mass produce, but it's part of something bigger. And then I was like that, I could do it. I could do a whole project that's about that specifically. And then I could handle doing it and enjoy it instead of it being a chore. So that was the way out. Maybe someday.
Well, something you said earlier about defining yourself as a conceptual artist, and you have the idea, and then you chase that idea and you become kind of a slave to that idea. And, coming back to the idea of being a parent, and something it's only coming to me now that my kids have moved out and they're independent and they're on their own, is that I really didn't realize until now how much headspace they occupy on a day-to-day basis that takes away from our creative. Like, we can't sit and totally let this concept take over our headspace for hours on end, days on end, weeks on end, whatever, because you've got these little people to take care of. And
that's why you should get a divorce. Because I find myself, I'm very creative when I don't have the kids.
Yeah.
And then when they go to their mom, and then they come back, and then I find myself more factory oriented, and I'm just shitting stuff out that I've done before in the past.
So that's your solution, Will?
Oh yeah. And then they go away. I'm so creative. Like, this is my week to be creative.
It's like you're an empty nester for like a few days, right?
Absolutely. You focus on the kids, and then I'm like, you can be the best dad in the world for a week.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it is definitely the focus is a problem. Like, having kids is like having roommates that never stop talking. And it's like, can I just think for a moment? Like, can you just stop talking about these things that you keep talking about?
But yeah, we've come to be more social this year, and meeting more artists out there on the road who are childless artists. And not that I would say it's a luxury to be able to really live in your art, because I love being a parent and I would never want to trade that for anything. I mean, I just recognize that the shift when somebody can only focus on their art and just live in that concept or in that world or whatever.
Right. Yeah, there's something lonely in that too. You have like no people to share it with. I'm like right now I got these two people who are like around, like I have an audience all the time, maybe too much audience, but it's an audience and they can experience the things that we do while we do them. So it's not like when I was like living in my van by myself, that was great for a while. And eventually it's like, oh, I'm just here by myself. It's the same campground, the same lake, and I'm just waiting for the next show. And like, there's no one else here to see this beautiful place. And I mean, out of that, partially it came like, well, having a family, you got like a posse coming with you.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a little bit the romantic idea of it. Of course, the reality is much messier and stressful, but that
it's
part
like,
is
well,
there.
Douglas and I go to shows and we're like, well, I wonder who I'm going to see. You're like, well, I know exactly who I'm going to see. You've got those three that you're going to see, and you're going to take them with you at every show. I'm like, oh, look, it's you again.
Yeah,
you're here. Yeah, I didn't know you got into the show.
Guaranteed companionship.
Your entourage
right,
came
whether you
along.
wanted it or not.
Yeah, if you want them or not, they're here.
Well, what's next for you? Do you have any projects or anything you're working on that's coming up?
Well, I've been doing the Kentuck show, Kentuck in Alabama. And they got a sauce furnace, has like a cast iron set up there. They cast, people can go there and scratch like little bowls that they cast right on the spot, or tiles. And the bowls I was really interested in because it's like a big sand cast and you can carve whatever you want that's half round. It doesn't have to be a bowl. And so I started just carving these seed pot type things there. And I've been doing those now for probably 15 years, and it got like plenty of work for a good season, or an infinite amount of work for a bad something that doesn't sell. But it goes with the whole installation. So there's like a laboratory. It's all plastic and aluminum and shiny, and it's got these pockets, and there are these seed pods that are being developed in these pockets. And so you go into this lab, and there'll be these seed pods in there. And you can buy these engineered seed pods that are made of cast iron, or they'll probably be ceramic ones eventually too, and maybe cast glass, I was thinking as well.
I'm looking at that right now on your website. Wow. They look like these metallic kind of like pot. I mean, that's what you just said, right? They're like these, like from nature, they look like.
Yeah, there's some of them look a little machine-like, but still like something that could have grown from a plant. And they're not, I don't treat them in any way because I like them getting rusty and just being this raw material that it is. But I finished the installation, and Janice had done some ceramic pieces that were like Petri dishes and things, and we had an installation in a gallery, and kind of finished the main part of the installation for that. But then for outdoor shows, it needs like a roof section for rain. And the biggest idea I had for it that I haven't finished is these little displays. And they're basically counters. So it looks like this is an active laboratory. Each seed pod has these numbers counting up because it's developing. But then the numbers are actually the price of the piece, but it's down to like a 10,000th of a cent. And so during a show, the price would like click up. It would like 10,000ths of cents would be going up, 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 up. And over a course of a show, the price would maybe rise like 5 to 10%. But it's like there's like this nervous counting going on. That's really just the thing developing. But then when somebody buys a piece, I would have to push a button. It stops the development. And then that's the price that they have to pay. And so it adds like a whole other psychological element to the whole idea of people haggling or, waiting to buy or not waiting to buy, like this whole other thing.
Right.
But I have to make the counters, and I have to program chips to actually do what I want them to do. And then I was going to add on the website that it would have the opposite happening. There'd be a price, but it's like twice as much as at the show. And it would slowly count down over the years. So like after a couple of years, it would be down to the show price. And after that, it would go lower. So, so if somebody was like, do you have
amazing.
Do you have these on your website? I'm like, well, yeah, they're on my website. But right now it's like twice the price. If you wait and nobody buys it, you might eventually get it cheaper. And then it will be like, do I wait?
Or it could be gone.
Yeah, is someone else going to buy it? And it's kind of like a reverse auction in a way. And it's like this weird psychological thing that will happen. And I'm curious what the reaction will be, if people will still try to get a deal, or if it's just because it's so complex, they don't even know how to do that, or, just like what will happen? What if I do that?
So this installation, this body of work, is this something that's going to make it out onto the art shows at some point? Is that what that end goal is at some point?
Yeah, I built it that it's easy, relatively easy to set up. It might be a bit of a Cirque du Soleil. It's got there's these floppy big plastic pieces that have to go into channels, and you can only carry them if you bend them a certain way. Otherwise, they flop around too much. And if it's windy, I don't know yet how challenging it will be to actually set it up. But it's only 40 pieces of things that stick together. It's similar to what I have in that it's modular and should be relatively easy to set up. But I might have to do some training on it. So.
Yeah.
To make it work.
There's always seemed to be a learning curve. And I think what works with yours, we've seen people over the years try to create these, the trailer booth that comes in. You've seen the other booths that come in that are like my ex actually had a really, really interesting one, but the
I remember
with
that
hers
one.
And but she didn't like the step up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the first thing
she wanted.
The whole thing with trailer booths, I was always like, well, the problem is the step up, that you have to step up. And the other problem is you get bugs all over it from the highway. Driving this thing on the highway, it's going to get splattered with bugs and stuff, and you're going to have to clean it. And then how do you keep rain out of it? Like in a highway going, 60 miles an hour with the wind, you might have 100-mile-an-hour winds hitting it. It's got to hold up and be waterproof, for sideways and upwards winds. And it's just
be like a little mobile home or something.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the benefit of not having to set it up every time goes away when you start thinking about like you said, the bugs, the wind, the whatever.
Yeah.
But what you're dealing with, your piece is not a shipping crate, because a lot of people do think that it is a shipping crate.
Yeah, and I'm always telling them
set it up every time.
Yeah, it's actually so much easier. Like if it was a shipping crate, I'd have to have a trailer, then you're dealing with gas mileage and parking and getting it in and out of shows. And you spend all this extra time and money and effort just dealing with a trailer. And I'm like, well, this only takes an hour to set up, an hour to tear down. It's probably taking me less time than if I had to deal with a trailer and all the side effects of that.
Right.
I mean, in terms of logistics, I am always wondering, so many people set up walls now, and then they set up a tent over the walls. It's like, well, you already have walls. All you need is a roof. You don't actually need a tent. You could just have a roof that goes onto your walls, and it would save you so much effort and stabilize your booth a lot better than having these separate elements that are funkily tied together and
precarious.
Yeah, you're building two things at once when you only need one.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great talk. I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to sit down, the three of us. And, this is only our second time that Will and I have had a guest on where we've done it as a three-way talk. And I think it went really well. So I'm glad
I'm glad we both had different things that we wanted to talk about. So I'm glad that we did it. Thanks for having patience with us as we kind of ping-ponged between the questions. But, it's so often, and I've said this to so many of our different friends that we've had here on the show, it's so often that you get to know somebody a little bit and you hang out with them, but you never really get into the actual art aspect of it. And sitting down and talking about only the art is a lot of fun. And I appreciate you. I appreciate what you do, and I appreciate a lot what you bring to our industry. When you are at a show, it kind of elevates us.
You make us look good.
He does. Makes us look real good. So I'll see you and the whole family. I think we all will. The three of us will be in Houston. I believe my kids will be in Houston as well.
Cool.
So,
wow. Everybody's in Houston. Or everybody here.
To seeing you both.
Okay.
Yeah, me too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. We'll see you down there.
See you down there.
Again.
Thank you.
So, Will, this was kind of a throwaway, but Joachim correlated staying in a hotel to being in a European prison cell. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I feel about hotels the way some people feel about chain restaurants.
Okay, yeah.
I like to know exactly what I'm getting into. You know, I want it to feel exactly the same no matter where I am. So
Yeah.
I look like a homeless person when I walk down the street going to my room with my pillow and my box fan and my ratty old suitcase.
Everything you need to get a good night's sleep.
Yeah, I turn that white noise on and, get those decibel levels high to drown out whatever's going on next door and get my rest. But I get what he's saying.
Yeah, I was wondering if the European prison cell offers reward points because...
We saw this news report this morning of this woman, this old 86-year-old woman who shot her husband because he was sitting around drinking too much. And I'm like, what a hell of a hillbilly retirement plan. Well, I'm 86. They're not going to mess with me too much in women's prison. I'll just, 3 squares and a little bit of light and exercise and a bed. There's my retirement.
Do you remember Kimber? Kimber Fiebiger said she actually considered if she went to Shakopee prison because they have an art program there, she could do art and have...
That's
have
right.
3 squares and a place to sleep. So,
yeah. Well, sir, I'm gonna let you get out to the glass studio. I'm gonna go be a slave to the easel for a while and
got some stuff
make good work
out there. Yeah. Before we wrap today, I just wanted to kind of tease next episode because I had a great talk. I got to know Kirsten Stingel, and some of the roadshow artists might know her from about, I don't know, well, you always say 10 years ago. But she's kind of come off the road and is selling her work not through art fairs. And so it's going to be an interesting talk about when you're kind of butting up against the complexities and the challenges of a market that isn't working for you and how you pivot and make other decisions. And it was a really good and open talk. And I'm looking forward to everyone hearing it next week. Our next episode.
Man, I cannot wait to hear this one myself. I have not, you've not teased me with a rough cut yet, so I'm excited. She has always been, honestly, one of my art show heroes.
Cool.
Really, our work could not be any more different, but I just admire her creativity and vision and what she brings. So excited about that talk. Thanks so much for sitting down with her.
Awesome. But yep, you and I, we've got to get some shit made and get our butts to the first show of the year. So I'll let you go here and take care, everyone. We'll see you.
Language, you vulgar bastard.
You're the vulgar bastard.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
All right. See you now.
This podcast is brought to you by the National Association of Independent Artists. The website is naiaartists.org.
Also sponsored by Zapplication. That's zapplication.org. And while you're at it, find us on social media and engage in these conversations.
Be sure to subscribe to this podcast to be notified when we release new episodes.
Oh, and if you like the show, we'd love it if you would give us your 5-star rating and offer up your most creative review on your podcast streaming service. See you next time.